Returning to Fatima in 1917, the children were kidnapped, interrogated, and even tortured by the local civil administrator because of their visions. Lucia in particular was intensely punished by her mother, who continued to accuse her daughter of lying. The visions brought no financial gain to the children or their families. In fact, they made the life of the children much more difficult. Francesco and Jacinta both died after the war in 1918 from an influenza epidemic that killed several million people across Europe. Lucia was the only, and in some ways perhaps the lonely, survivor of the apparitions of Fatima. She was the only person in the world who knew the secret that most intrigued the world. This secret had been revealed only to Lucia in 1917, and the Madonna specifically requested that it remain concealed until the time was right. Lucia joined a convent and became a nun, first a Dorothean and finally an enclosed Carmelite, as was her desire. In the summer of 1943, Sister Lucia came down with pneumonia, which turned into pleurisy. She thought that she would die because her greatest companions on earth, Francesco and Jacinta, both died of pleurisy. Therefore, she wrote down the secret, sealed it, and gave it to her bishop. It was consigned to the Pope in Rome, with the condition that it would be revealed before 1960, because, she said, in 1960 it will seem clearer. In due course, she completely recovered from her illness. So the secret was entrusted to the Vatican, and there it remained in a safe, unrevealed for almost 6 decades. This is where the real drama begins, a drama that should never have taken place. But before looking at the intriguing story of how successive popes handled the Third Secret of Fatima, its contents and its significance today, there is another story from many centuries ago that in a mysterious way, as you will see, coincides remarkably with the contents of the Third Secret. It is the story of a saint from the 12th century with the gift of prophecy, Saint Malachy of Armagh. He prophesied the domination and persecution of Ireland and the Catholic faith of its people for a week of centuries by the English. History prove this true, making Malachy a true prophet. In 1139, Malachy walked to Rome via Scotland, England, and France to give an account of his diocese in Ireland to Pope Innocent II. While in Rome, Malachy received a strange vision of the prophecy of popes, wherein was unfolded before his mind a list of 112 cryptic Latin phrases that refer to the identities of the various popes who were to rule the Church until the end of time. Malachy did what any saint would do. He entrusted the manuscript to the Pope, who put it in the Vatican archives until its discovery more than 400 years later. The Prophecy of Popes was first published by Arnold de Wyon in 1595, and since then there has been much discussion as to whether they are genuine predictions of St. Malachy or mere forgeries. The silence of St. Bernard, Malachy's friend and biographer, has been proposed as a strong argument against their authenticity, but that is by no means conclusive if we understand that it was most probably Malachy's intention not to reveal it, since he had entrusted it to the authority of the Pope. In 1951, a Belgian Jesuit by the name of René Thibault published a book in French entitled Mysterious Prophecy of Popes. He had been commissioned by the Vatican to research whether the prophecy of popes could be considered true or not. Notice that at this time, the Vatican was in possession of the Third Secret of Fatima that Sister Lucia had entrusted to the Pope. In a very scholarly and in-depth way, Thibault concluded that the prophecy of popes is authentic and of Celtic origin. He died a year later in 1952, and his book was not widely disseminated. The prophecy of Pope consists of 112 short phrases in Latin. Each phrase somehow describes each pope who came to the throne of St. Peter. Those who have undertaken to interpret and explain these cryptic prophecies have succeeded in discovering how the short mystical phrases of Malachy connect to every one of the individual popes up to the present day. As examples, we will consider the last 9 popes. Pope Leo XIII, number 102 of 112, his phrase, light in the heavens, history records that Leo XIII wrote encyclicals on Catholic social teaching that were still being digested 100 years later. He is recognized to have added considerably to theology, the science of God. Saint Pius X, number 103 of 112, his phrase, ardent fire. History records that this pope had great personal piety and achieved a number of important reforms in the devotional and liturgical life of priests and lay people. Pope Benedict XV, number 104 of 112, his phrase, religio depopulata, translates depopulated religion or religion laid waste. His pontificate from 1914 to 1922 coincided with the full 4 years of the First World War and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that brought about the purges of Stalin and the killing of millions upon millions of Orthodox Christians. Pope Pius XI reigned from 1922 until 1939. Number 105 of 112, his phrase, intrepid faith. History records that this pope stood up to the fascist and communist forces that lined up against him in the lead up to World War II. Pope Pius XII reigned from 1939 until 1958. Number 106 of 112, his phrase, angelic pastor. History records that this pope was very mystical and is believed to have received visions. People would kneel when they received telephone calls from him. His encyclicals added enormously to the understanding of Catholic beliefs, even if they are now overlooked because of the focus on the Second Vatican Council, which occurred soon after his reign. Pope John XXIII, number 107 of 112, his phrase, pastor and sailor. History records that prior to his election he was Patriarch of Venice, a marine city, home of the gondolas. Returning to the Third Secret of Fatima at this point, Pope John XXIII was the first pope to read The Secret in 1959. He talked about it with his confessors and other advisors. Despite the fact that millions, if not tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of Catholics were waiting patiently to know its contents, on May 13, 1960, Pope John XXIII refused to publish it. It was suppressed by the Vatican. Sister Lucia was silenced and forbidden to meet anyone from outside the convent where she lived without the direct permission of the Vatican. Only cardinals had the liberty to visit her, although few did. Pope Paul VI, number 108 of 112, his phrase, flower of flowers. His family coat of arms displayed 3 lilies. The lily is the symbol of purity. Pope Paul VI published an encyclical, Humanae Vitae, against the use of birth control at the height of the sexual revolution in the 1960s. History records that Pope Paul VI went to Fatima in 1967. He requested Sister Lucia's presence at a public mass on May 13th. She attended and met the Pope on the podium after Mass. She, the visionary of Fatima, knelt before him and asked to speak with him in private. He refused, telling her to speak to her bishop and that he would convey any information. When the crowd, fully conscious of her presence, began chanting Lucia, Lucia, she was led to the front, and there was a large cheer. Lucia faced the crowd and wept. It is most likely that she wept because the message that the Madonna wanted to give the world was silenced by the Vatican.